Hello, I'm Brannon Howse, and welcome to the Worldview Weekend Hour. Tonight, I want to speak to you on the topic of exposing the worldview of George Soros. Exposing the worldview of George Soros. My guess is most of you know who George Soros is, but do you really know what his worldview is? Tonight, we'll try to examine that in this hour that has been allotted to us. We could spend many programs on this, but let's get started. First, let me just simply say our new magazine came out. Here we are filming on Wednesday evening, February 8th, 2017, and our brand new magazine came out, and it talks all about the Ozarks Worldview Weekend. It's a full color magazine. It's 48 pages. We dropped it in the mail to close to 50,000 mailboxes, and it also has numerous articles on the national security threat of electromagnetic pulse bomb, cyber hacking, ISIS attacking our power grid, special agents or special forces from Iran in our country, quoting Ted Koppel, former CIA Director James Woolsey, former CIA agent Peter Pry, and Newt Gingrich, and many others who are warning our country and warning our elected officials about the dangers of our power grid and the threat to it. It's 48 pages, a lot of great articles. If you would like to get one, if you've not received one in the mail, you'd like to get one, just go to wvwtv.com/digest, wvwtv.com/digest. We'll send you one copy, or you could get multiple copies free of charge if you'd like to pass out to your friends. Some of the folks who have received this in the mail have already emailed us asking for free quantities because they read the articles and they want to pass them out to family and friends. We're happy to do that. It's a great way for you to introduce our broadcast network to your family and friends. So free articles in this magazine. The magazine is free. Worldview Weekend Digest, wvwtv.com/digest to order some free ones, wvwtv.com/digest. As you know, right the day after the election of Donald Trump, I warned that I believed America was entering one of the most dangerous times in our history as a nation, because the Marxists and the Muslims were not going to just sit down quietly. They were going to do everything they could to, I believe, disrupt the agenda of Donald Trump. We don't have to agree with Donald Trump on everything, to agree with him on some major things: securing the border, national security, hardening our power grid, vetting people that come into our country, dealing with the issue of drugs pouring over the border. And yet it seems as though the Marxists and the Muslims are going to stop him, many of them working on the international level with economics. And so I think he'll continue to see some crises arising that have been manufactured by men, and they will be to try to slow down his agenda. But not only that, we could see civil unrest in America. Read an article this morning about the military, and there's discussions of actually forming branches of the military, or divisions inside the military, I should say, that will deal specifically with urban warfare breaking out in American cities. That's how concerned, I'm reading from credible sources, the U.S. military is about, and our elected officials are, about guerrilla warfare, civil unrest, food riots, other kind of riots, anarchy in the streets of major American cities. But the question is this: are there those that are fomenting this? Are they fomenting this? Are they creating it? Are they funding it? We know, because we've done programs showing the video clips of some Muslims speaking at Muslim conferences saying that they were able to carry out an Arab Spring in the Middle East. Why not in America? We know we have many Marxists for many years calling for a civil unrest, a revolution, a civil war, and guerrilla warfare in the streets of America. This goes all the way back to the 1950s and 60s, and testimony from the FBI and the head of the FBI before Congress. We've done complete programs on this. Nothing is new. It's just simply now coming to a head. And so I said the day after Donald Trump was elected, we're entering one of the most dangerous times in America. Well, about 3 months later, it's 3 months later, but at least it's being written by someone else. Cher Saviv from the website FamilySecurityMatters.org is writing the same thing. Our most dangerous and treacherous times in our history. Well, again, I agree with her, and I'm glad to see that there's another writer warning the American people why things are so dangerous. And I think tonight's program will help you understand that. I think one of the people behind a lot of the protest, whether it be in Ferguson, and we have an article here on the desk, this is from the Washington Times. George Soros funds Ferguson protests, hopes to spur civil action. There's plenty of evidence George Soros and has been using his, he's a billionaire, so he's been using his billions to fund things that are totally contrary to our form of government, our nation. And yet, how much do you really know about George Soros? Who is he giving money to? What's the agenda of some of these groups and individuals? We hope to get to that tonight. First, let's start off with some video clips of George Soros in his own words, so we might have an accurate understanding of just who is George Soros and what is his worldview. As we discuss tonight, the topic, exposing the worldview of George Soros. Here's our first clip from 60 Minutes. Watch this.
To understand the complexities and contradictions in his personality, you have to go back to the very beginning, to Budapest, where George Soros was born 68 years ago to parents who were wealthy, well-educated, and Jewish.
When the Nazis occupied Budapest in 1944, George Soros' father was a successful lawyer. He lived on an island in the Danube and liked to commute to work in a rowboat. But knowing there were problems ahead for the Jews, he decided to split his family up. He bought them forged papers, and he bribed a government official to take 14-year-old George Soros in and swear that he was his Christian godson. But survival carried a heavy price tag. While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews.
These are pictures from 1944 of what happened to George Soros' friends and neighbors.
You're a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust by posing as a Christian.
Right.
And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps.
Right. I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made.
In what way?
That one should think ahead, one should understand and anticipate events, and one is threatened. It was a tremendous threat of evil. I mean, it was a very personal experience of evil.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes, yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection. But it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt?
No.
For example, that I'm Jewish and here I am watching these people go, I could just as easily be there, I should be there, none of that.
Well, of course I could be on the other side, or I could be the one from whom the thing is being taken away. But there was no sense that I shouldn't be there, because that was, well, actually, funny way, it's just like in markets, that if I weren't there, of course I wasn't doing it, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. In other words, whether I was there or not, I was only a spectator, the property was being taken away.
Do you not find that troubling? You say, well, Brannon, he was 14 years of age. Yes, but at 14 years of age, did you not have a moral compass yet to know what was right and what is wrong? And he said his character was formed then. He was asked, did you feel guilty about what you were taking part in? And he says, no. Again, you could say, well, this child was put in a very tough situation by his father, and what he had to see was pure evil, and what he was made to go with his protector on these rounds was certainly wrong and evil, and as a 14-year-old, he ought to have some guilt for that, or have at least been distressed by it. And yet, he seems to have no guilt at all, not be distressed by it, but if he wasn't there, someone else would have been. Kind of a pragmatist view, a moral relativistic view, no right, no wrong. Who believes something like that? Is that the worldview of someone that maybe has a God complex, that believes that they are God or that they are above any kind of moral standard? Is this maybe a little window into the worldview of George Soros? But perhaps the reason he sees, as it apparently is suggested in these video clips, the reason he sees the world as he does is because of the way he sees himself. Watch this.
Are you religious?
No.
Do you believe in God?
No.
Soros told us he believes God was created by man, not the other way around, which may be why he thinks he can smooth out the world's imperfections.
Soros believes man created God. You know who else teaches that? A guy by the name of Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle is a New Age writer. Oprah Winfrey really likes Eckhart Tolle. She taught a New Age class with Eckhart Tolle to some 1 million people that signed up online a few years ago. And Oprah Winfrey says that she likes this one line in Eckhart Tolle's book. It was in chapter 2 of one of Eckhart Tolle's books. And I have on audio Oprah Winfrey saying, "This is one of my favorite lines in your book, Eckhart." And it is the line that man created God in his own image. Man created God in his own image. You just heard 60 Minutes say this is what George Soros believes. Does this maybe give us a little insight into the worldview of George Soros? These New Agers, these people who believe that man created God in his own image? Isn't it interesting whether it's the Marxists or the Muslims or the New Agers or the cults, they're all going for world domination. And what is George Soros doing? He's running an organization called Open Society, Open Borders. What will that lead to? World government. Well, who's behind the idea of world government? Certainly not God, not in this way. It's Satan. And in fact, the Bible makes it very clear there will eventually be a world government, but Daniel chapter 2 verse 44 says that God's kingdom will come, it will crush Satan's kingdom, and then of God's kingdom there'll be no end. This rebellion started at the Tower of Babel, Genesis 10 and 11, and it is continuing today with the culmination of a new world order or world government or global governance. By the way, these are their words, not mine. Henry Kissinger, Mikhail Gorbachev, and many others, George H. Bush. And how do you have world government? By having no borders. How do you have world government? By not having national sovereignty. So you see, my friends, when you do away with a nation's borders, as in the case of George Soros' Open Borders Society, Open Society Foundation, when you have no borders, you don't have a nation. When you do away with your currency, you're doing away with your sovereignty. You see, folks, they can take away America's sovereignty by not only eliminating our national borders, but by taking away our national currency. Those are the two things that identify a nation. Its borders and its currency. Not to mention its language and its cultures as well, right? But borders and money. This is how you dissolve the sovereignty of a nation and eventually roll it into world government. And it appears that's exactly what George Soros is for. Now, did you know, before we play some more clips, did you know that George Soros is a graduate of the London School of Economics? We've done entire programs on the London School of Economics. I've shown you many times the Fabian window. The Fabian window created by George Bernard Shaw. It has the earth on fire. I think that's some kind of financial crisis. The earth is on fire. Two men are banging on it with hammers on an anvil, and it's on fire, and they're banging on it, and it says at the top of the window, remold it nearer to the heart's desire, remolding the earth, taking advantage of crises, and in some cases, manufacturing crises in order to do the things that otherwise people would never do. George McGregor Burns, a globalist, I quote in the book Grave Influence, said that it is through a crisis and that the people will be willing to go where they otherwise would not be willing to go. So you cannot let a good crisis go to waste. You manufacture a crisis if necessary to do away with national sovereignty and have no borders and do away with the monetary system of nations, to deprive them of their sovereignty, to create world government. And I believe, biblically speaking, theologically and biblically speaking, I believe the folks behind this are people that are indeed tuned in to a demonic world view. They believe such heresy as man created God. And the Bible makes it very clear. We're headed toward a world government of Antichrist. And I believe it will be based in Babylon, 58 miles south of Baghdad. I write about it in my book, The Coming Religious Reich. 500 and some odd pages, hardcover, The Coming Religious Reich. And I lay out for you how it's going to happen. And we see the Bible tells us it will happen. We see it in Daniel. We see it in Revelation. But we now see some of those very things coming to pass, I believe, through world events. The stage is being set for Bible prophecy to be fulfilled. And I believe men like George Soros are some of the globalists that are helping to bring that about as they deny absolute truth and as they are involved in destroying America by funding anti-American groups, Marxist and Muslim groups. But as I said to you, George Soros is a graduate of the London School of Economics. And we know the Fabian socialists, what do they want? They want socialism by evolution, not revolution. That was what the Fabians wanted. But the Fabians often would work with known Marxists who wanted outright revolution. In fact, some of the Marxists would at times pose as Fabian socialists because they knew if they were known as being outright Marxists, they wouldn't be accepted. So they would huddle up with the Fabian socialists. So the Fabians always kind of wanted socialism by evolution, not revolution over time. But they were more than happy to work with the outright Marxists that were fomenting for a revolution. I think in many cases that's what's going on. People are funding groups that they know will go for bringing about a revolution, civil war, civil unrest. They don't want to get their hands dirty with it, but they're more than happy to fund groups that are talking in that way and perhaps inciting that kind of agitation. The Saul Alinsky, agitate to the point of conflict. I believe that's what's going on with George Soros. That's my analysis. That's my belief. That's my opinion after studying this man. And so it's ironic that he's a graduate of the London School of Economics, since we know what Fabian socialism is all about. And the London School of Economics was a Fabian school. Here is from the Encyclopedia Britannica. It says that early members of the Fabian Society and co-founders of the London School of Economics and Political Science, Sidney Webb, also helped to reorganize the University of London into a federation of teaching institutions and served in the government as a Labour Party member. By the way, the Labour Party in Great Britain was birthed out of the Fabian Socialist Society. You doubt me? Here's a whole paper from the Fabian Society. It says so right there, Fabian Society, Leading Labor, the Fabian Essays. And what's it say? Right there, front page, first page, the society was one of the original founders, meaning the Fabian Society, was one of the original founders of the Labour Party and is constitutionally affiliated to the party. So there you go, folks. The Fabian Society started in London in the mid-1800s. They want world government. The Fabian Society gave birth to the Labour Party. The Labour Party in Great Britain would be what would be people like former Prime Minister Tony Blair. What is Tony Blair doing? He's running the Tony Blair Faith Foundation, calling for the religions of the world to unite, calling for globalism. And of course, who does Tony Blair work with? He works with people like Rick Warren. Rick Warren brought him to his church a few years ago and gave him an award. So here's an article from the Labour Party. It has been the major democratic socialist party in Britain. What has the Labour Party? It's a socialist party. That right there from the Encyclopedia Britannica. So again, the Fabian socialist, they want world government. They're socialist, obviously. They started the Labour Party. Some of their key people today are promoting those ideas. And George Soros is a graduate of the London School of Economics. We have more to get to, but watch this next clip.
Why is it that Americans can't invest in the quantum fund? It's an offshore fund. Why is that?
Because the fund is not registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We are not
licensed to do business in the United States.
That's right.
Because?
Because we are not registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Because we find it more convenient to operate without it.
So in some ways it's to escape regulation.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a pretty bold admission, right? He doesn't seem too ashamed about it, does he? So he's making lots of money doing things that I guess would not be allowed if you were registered here in the U.S. So you might be wondering, how is it that he makes his money? Well, he's a speculator. According to my research, he's a speculator, and he's involved in a lot of things on a global scale. Some things that perhaps maybe would not be allowed if he were registered here in the United States of America. But what does he do with his money once he makes it? We'll find out in just a few minutes, but watch this next clip.
To give the impression of the moral high ground, the Soros Network also funds what they call evangelical and Catholic mascots to serve as surprising validators for their anti-Christian projects and candidates. Imagine the evil of using a Christian front to de-Christianize the culture and nation. In this video clip from the New America Foundation, an executive admits their rent an evangelical model of social change.
Doing a sort of rent an evangelical, as we used to call it on the national security side, rent a general model.
The network funds religious groups including Jim Wallace's Sojourners, PICO, Faith in Public Life, Faithful America, Richard Cizik's New Evangelical Partnership, Telos, J Street, National Council of Churches, Evangelicals for Human Life, Catholics United, Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good, Catholics for Choice, and through the network's National Immigration Forum, they fund religious groups advancing open borders, amnesty, and voter registration for their new America.
Did you catch all that? Rent an evangelical. Rent an evangelical. And of course, that's what my book, Religious Trojan Horse, that I wrote that came out in 2012 is all about. Religious Trojan Horse. I deal with many of these so-called evangelicals that are promoting social justice, globalism, and so many other isms that are undermining America, and they brought them now into the church. And that's the real threat. The real threat, a religious Trojan horse. They're rent an evangelical. You heard that phrase? That's why this is a religious Trojan horse. Here is an article from Breitbart. Progressive Christian leader Jim Wallace. By the way, Jim Wallace, I write about him extensively in Grave Influence and the book Religious Trojan Horse. By the way, Grave Influence, Religious Trojan Horse, The Coming Religious Reich. That's all part of a trilogy. It's all part of a series. It's not fiction, it's real. It's hundreds of footnotes documenting how we got here and where we're going. And in Grave Influence and Religious Trojan Horse, I document that Jim Wallace has been who George Soros funds. Jim Wallace has been involved in funding or fighting for many things that would be called a Marxist ideology or a neo-Marxist ideology. Involved in many of the things in South America, promoting many of the communist groups in South America. I write about that extensively in the book Religious Trojan Horse. And George Soros, well, he funds people like Jim Wallace. Here is the article, Breitbart. Progressive Christian leader Jim Wallace admits his lie about receiving millions from George Soros. Well, not only does Wallace get money from him, and Wallace is a religious leftist, but unfortunately, you have many so-called evangelicals who would not call themselves leftists, who actually would boast about how conservative they are, but yet they're participating in organizations funded by George Soros. Make sure you understand what I'm saying here. Of course, there are the religious left that get money from George Soros because they're all leftist. But there are plenty of people that are part of even the religious right and evangelicalism that would not call themselves leftists, that would pride themselves on being Republicans or conservatives, who are taking part in organizations that are reportedly funded by George Soros. These are what I call useful idiots. Now, again, understand, as I've said so many times before, I'm not calling them a name. That's an historical term when the communists would co-opt people to do their bidding. And in this case, you just heard one progressive admit in that video clip that we have a project of kind of rent an evangelical. And unfortunately, many of these so-called evangelicals seem to be easily attracted to publicity, getting their name in the paper, being on TV, and perhaps getting money. Could it be the old follow the money? Well, what is an example of an organization that some of the right and the left are both involved in that's being funded by George Soros that's undermining America? Well, I believe one such example would be the Evangelical Immigration Roundtable, and I write about it extensively in my book, Religious Trojan Horse. You can get a copy of it as an ebook or a hardcover at wvwtv.com/bookstore, wvwtv.com/bookstore. But the Evangelical Immigration Roundtable is a bunch of people from the right and the left fighting for amnesty. Amnesty, folks. It's so interesting because, now they find themselves in a pickle with Donald Trump because he's been elected, and now many of them are opposing him with ads they're taking out in the paper. And they're all doing this under the guise of this is what Jesus would do. And they twist Scripture. They take Scripture, Matthew 25, which has nothing to do with amnesty, Leviticus 19, which has nothing to do with amnesty. And they twist Scripture to say that somehow Jesus would do this. No, the Bible is very specific about borders, authority, the purpose of government. Romans 13, reward the righteous, punish the wicked, make a stable and just society. You can't do that if you don't have borders. You can't do that if you have terrorists pouring over the border. You have drugs pouring over the border. You have people pouring over the border doing work without any liability insurance, workers' comp, paying taxes, taking money under the table to do projects that steals money and income from American families. That's not what creates a stable and just society. You have all these religious folks running around talking about what Jesus would do. Well, Jesus was very clear about not stealing, theft, ill-gotten gains, corruption. And yet that's exactly what happens when you have no borders and people can just pour over into your nation. Well, here's the Evangelical Immigration Roundtable that, according to Breitbart, National Immigration Forum funded by Soros and the left. The National Immigration Forum, the force behind the so-called Evangelical Immigration Table, is actually a front group for players of the institutional left, including billionaire George Soros and the Ford Foundation. Ford Foundation, that's a globalist organization, according to reporting by Breitbart News and other outlets. Well, who would be a part of the Evangelical Immigration Roundtable? Could it be anyone that might be the president of your church denomination? Could it be the head of a pro-family group or religious group that maybe you give money to? Could you actually be giving money to people that are involved in this? You might want to pay attention. Here is from their own website, evangelicalimmigrationtable.com, a list of the members of this organization that Breitbart's reporting is funded in part by George Soros. Russell Moore of the Southern Baptist Convention, the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Samuel Rodriguez, who ironically gave one of the prayers at Trump's inauguration. I think Trump better be careful who he's associating with. We have Ronnie Floyd, that's the last president of the Southern Baptist Convention. William Hamill, he's listed as the president of the Evangelical Free Church of America. I bet some of you go to an Evangelical Free Church of America. I used to. I would be very careful, in my opinion. I'd be very careful giving money to any of these churches that then is kicked back to these church headquarters. I would give in a way that the money you give stays in the local church. That's my personal opinion. That's what I've always done. I always gave in a way where none of the money would be given back to the national headquarters, whether it's the Evangelical Free Church of America or the Southern Baptist Convention, because I don't trust what they're up to and what they're doing. You might want to do the same. That's my opinion. Johnny Hunt, former president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Jerry Porter, General Superintendent, Church of the Nazarene. George Wood, General Superintendent, General Council, Assemblies of God. Brian Wright, former President of the Southern Baptist Convention. Jim Daly, President and CEO of Focus on the Family. Kevin Ezel, President, North American Mission Board. That'd be the Southern Baptist. Richard Land, President Emeritus, Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Louis Palau, Ed Stetzer, formerly of Lifeway Research. Danny Aiken, President, Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. David Dockery, President of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. Richard Mao, President, Fuller Theological Seminary. Paige Patterson, President, Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Joseph Stoll, President, Cornerstone University. Shane Claiborne, I think he's one of those emergent church authors. Stuart and Jill Briscoe of Brookfield, Wisconsin. Matt Chandler, I think Matt Chandler would be one of those neo-Calvinists. He's with the Village Church and Acts 29. Matt Chandler. Dr. Jack Graham, well, he'd be the pastor of Prestonwood Baptist Church at the time we're filming. J.D. Greer, another pastor. Bill and Lynn Hybels, no shock there, Lynn and Bill Hybels. We've done whole programs on them. Max Lucado, Bob Roberts, William Dinsky. I mean, the list is extensive. You ought to go and read about it at, evangelicalimmigrationtable.com. And again, this group filled with both people from the left and the right, basically pushing for amnesty, using Scripture out of context in some of their PSAs, public service announcements. And according to Breitbart, they're funded by George Soros. In fact, watch this video clip of some of these people at the Evangelical Immigration Roundtable press conference that, again, according to news reports, is funded by the man we're looking at tonight, George Soros. Watch this clip.
I'd like to introduce Tom Minnery right now. Tom is the Senior Vice President of Government and Public Policy for Focus on the Family. Tom is a former senior editor of Christianity Today magazine and a Capitol Hill correspondent for Gannett News Service. Tom, welcome.
Thank you very much. Let me start by reading a very short statement from our president, Jim Daly. I signed on to this statement because immigration reform is more than just another issue to families. It profoundly affects their stability, structure, and their quality of life.
Evangelicals believe the Bible and care about people, and so that's why we encourage immigration reform. When I talk to evangelicals, I find that many times people just don't know.
82.3 million Americans self-identify themselves as evangelicals in the United States.
Good morning. There are many ordinary days in Washington. I think this is an extraordinary day.
Thank you all.
Well, many of these people that make up the Evangelical Immigration Roundtable are at it again. Here's an article from ktxs.com dated February 8th, 2017. That's today, February 8th, 2017. Headline, 100 evangelical leaders buy ad to denounce Trump's refugee ban. Of course, they call it the Muslim ban, the travel ban. It's an extreme vetting. It's a temporary executive order, and it is the whole idea is to vet who's coming over here. I had on my radio show today Shahram Hadian, who, by the way, will be speaking with me at numerous Worldview Weekend rallies, free one-night Worldview Weekend rallies coming up in April. He'll be with me in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, La Crosse, Wisconsin, Green Bay, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Free one night, full details. You can register, and you must register so we can make sure we have enough seats. You can register at worldviewweekend.com/conferences, or the shorter URL, wvwtv.com/conferences. And Shahram will be with me speaking on these topics at these free Worldview Weekend rallies in April. And Shahram was just on my program today. Shahram is a former Muslim from Iran, and he was detailing how he was separated from his mother for over 2 years because of the travel ban by Jimmy Carter. And he says these people are belly aching about being separated for a few hours or a couple days from family members. He said, I was separated from my mother for over 2 years when I was a child because she got caught in Europe and couldn't get to, I think it was Canada where they were. And so, or maybe by then they were here in the U.S., but she could not get out of Europe to get to North America. And for 2.5 years, he was separated from his mother because of the travel ban put in place by President Jimmy Carter because, of course, Iran, they were involved in storming our embassy in Tehran and taking hostage the embassy workers. And he said on my broadcast today, this made perfect sense, and I understand why it was done. But where are the people criticizing President Jimmy Carter? No, these same people trashing on Trump think Jimmy Carter is a wonderful person. They praise Jimmy Carter. So again, the hypocrisy, the double standard is overwhelming. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with what Trump is doing. And in fact, Shahram, an immigrant to America, legally says he fully supports what Trump is doing. Well, again, these 100 evangelicals who may fall into the category of what we heard earlier from one lady saying, the old rent an evangelical program. Well, these 100 evangelicals, they've bought an ad, according to KTXS, to denounce Donald Trump and his vetting, extreme vetting, or his travel ban, which they call refugee ban. And they include people like Timothy Keller. Oh, not a shock there. Tim Keller, who has written the book Generous Justice, which could just as well have been called Social Justice, Socialism. I have a whole chapter on Tim Keller in my book, The Coming Religious Reich. You see, what's going on here, folks, is we have people that are promoting, I believe, socialism, like George Soros, in the culture, who are then funding religious groups and people who are involved in organizations who are from religious groups that are then promoting socialist ideas. It's no wonder our young people today, coming out of most evangelical churches, embrace socialism. Many of the leaders they support and read, whether it's people like, Timothy Keller or some of these other neo-Calvinists, they promote social justice. That's another word for socialism. So Tim Keller, who's written the book Generous Justice, that could have just as well been written and called Social Justice, is reportedly a part of this. He's a signee. And then you have author Anne Van Kamps, or Voskamp. Well, not shocked there, Voskamp. She's written a book that, in fact, some of it is so graphic that she writes about her spiritual love affair with Jesus that I couldn't even read some of it in good conscience on the air. And then you have Bill and Lynn Hybels. Of course, Bill Hybels of the whole seeker-sensitive Rick Warren, Peter Drucker model. Lynn Hybels has worked and written for Sojourners, which is Jim Wallace's group, and Jim Wallace is funded, according to numerous reports, by George Soros. And then you have people like Max Lucado, Leith Anderson, president in the National Association of Evangelicals. Interesting to note that many of these 100 so-called evangelicals who have taken on to this ad, February 8th, 2017, are also part of the Evangelical Immigration Roundtable. But it's not only the religious groups that George Soros is funding. Here's a new article just from Breitbart News this month, February 2017. Records, it says, Soros Fund executives funded Paul Ryan, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, John McCain, John Kasich, and Lindsey Graham in 2016. Wow, big shocker there, huh? So George Soros was giving money to some of the GOP, some of the rhinos. Folks, this George Soros man is using his money. And in fact, here's an article from, this is dated 2016, August 2016. Investments led to Senate passage of Gang of Eight immigration bill. Do you remember the Gang of Eight immigration bill? That would have brought about amnesty, which, by the way, again, don't forget that the Marxists have openly admitted, the socialists, Marxists, the Communist Party, they've all openly written and talked about the fact that if they could get all these illegals to become legal and get them voting, they could win every progressive election from now on. And the Gang of Eight was really being used to push this idea. And who was part of the Gang of Eight that was reportedly funded by George Soros? Well, it included Marco Rubio. In addition to Marco Rubio, you have Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, Senator John McCain, Lindsey Graham. These are all Republicans. And then you have Democrats Dick Durbin and Chuck Schumer, along with Robert Menendez and Michael Bennet. This is your Gang of Eight. But again, George Soros funding these people. And what is going on with these Republicans? Do they not want to be in office? Because again, the idea is to make these illegals legal citizens so they can vote, so you can win every progressive election. Listen to one activist, Melissa Medina, talk about this just a few years ago. I've played this clip on another broadcast, but I think you ought to hear it again. Watch this clip.
Now, as you know, the negative tone of the immigration debate has created intense interest in the Latino and immigrant community. We, in the last election, had the largest turnout of Latino voters in our history. And everything tells us these voters fully intend to become engaged into the elections in the future. They have tasted what it is like to participate and win, and they are not going to go away. Because their involvement is basically because they feel that they are being taken advantage of, they are being singled out, and they are being scapegoated. Now, when they voted in November, they voted overwhelmingly for progressive candidates. Barack Obama got 2 out of every 3 voters that showed up. And so I think there's 2 things, very quickly, that matter for the progressive community. Number 1, if we are to expand this electorate to win, the progressive community needs to solidly be on the side of immigrants. That will solidify and expand the progressive coalition for the future. And let me tell you, when you are in the middle of a fight for your life, you will remember who was there with you. And immigrants count the progressives to be able to do that. Number 2, we reformed the immigration laws. It puts 12 million people on the path to citizenship and eventually voters. Can you imagine if we have even the same ratio, 2 out of 3, if we have 8 million new voters that care about our issue and will be voting, we will create a governing coalition for the long term, not just for an election cycle.
My friends, that's Alessio Medina, and you can go look up his worldview. Alessio Medina, involved in many socialist causes, openly involved in socialist causes and organizations, saying, look, if we can get these folks to become legal citizens, we can get them to vote and win every progressive election. What's another word for progressive? Socialist. See, folks, George Soros is using his money to reshape America, to, well, as Barack Obama said, to radically transform America. Radically transform America. And that's exactly what George Soros, I believe, is helping to do. George Soros, according to Discover the Networks, derives his fortune at about $13 billion. That's his personal fortune, $13 billion, which is further leveraged by at least another $25 billion in investor assets controlled by his firm, Soros Fund Management. So he has a lot of money. And one of the groups he runs is called Open Society. And again, if you have an open society, if you have no borders, you end up with world government. And of course, that will mean that we no longer are under a constitution. We're under world government. Do you want to be under the idea and worldview of the United Nations? Do you know, which largely is dominated by Marxists and Muslims, by the way. Do you really want to be under the worldview of those kind of people? Or would you rather be under the Constitution? Do you want to be thrown in jail for hate crime for speaking the truth about Islam? Because that's the blasphemy ban that they've been bouncing around at the United Nations for a few years. Do you want the right to teach your children the truth, to teach them the Constitution, to take them to church? Because if we have world government influenced by the United Nations, you won't be able to do that. It's called the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and you could not take your child to church if your child didn't want to go. You could actually be prosecuted. They could hire an attorney. Attorney would be given to them, actually, provided by the courts, and they could sue you. That's called the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I've done a whole hour of television program on that, and then I had an hour where I interviewed a leading attorney out of Washington, D.C., who is fighting the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Folks, this is what you end up with when you end up with world government. And you end up with a world government by having an open society with no borders. Now, we see a lot of people rioting, looting, burning, involved in anarchy, and there are some reports that George Soros is funding some of these protesters. They're paid protesters. They're getting paid to do this. There are reports on social media where people are being encouraged to come and be paid to take part in this. Well, my friends, would we be shocked that some of this is turning violent when you realize who some of the players are and the things that they're saying and who's behind some of the organizations that George Soros is funding, according to numerous reports? Here's an article from the Soros Files. It's called sorosfiles.com. It's written by my friend Cliff Kincaid, who's one of our contributing columnists at worldviewtimes.com. He says the leading recipient of Soros money is the ACLU, which, by the way, was started by a communist. Roger Baldwin started the ACLU. Roger Baldwin was also involved with communist groups. I write about Roger Baldwin extensively in the book Grave Influence. Grave Influence is the first in a trilogy. It goes Grave Influence, Religious Trojan Horse, and then the Coming Religious Reich. So Roger Baldwin was the founder of the ACLU and a communist. By the way, John Dewey was also a board member of the ACLU. John Dewey was one of the men who signed the Humanist Manifesto and then went to Russia in the 1930s to study the Karl Marx way of education, and then came back to America and he started the Socialist Society. So you kind of see where this is all going, right? Well, one of the leading recipients of Soros' money, according to Cliff Kincaid, is the ACLU, which is so extreme that it favors the legalization of all drugs, even heroin and crack cocaine, and opposes virtually all measures taken to curtail drug use. Well, that's kind of interesting, because how many of you are familiar with a gentleman that Sean Hannity had on pretty much every night before the election by the name of Peter Schweitzer? Peter Schweitzer, author of Do As I Say, Not As I Do, speculates on the possible reasons underlying Soros' support for drug legalization. Quote, Peter Schweitzer writes, quote, one very possible answer is that he hopes to profit from them, drugs, once they become legal. He has been particularly active in South America, buying up large tracts of land and forging alliances with those in a position to mass produce narcotics should they become legalized in the United States. He has also helped fund the Andean Council of Coca leaf producers. Needless to say, this organization would stand to benefit enormously from the legalization of cocaine. He has also taken a 9% stake in Banco de Colombia, located in the Colombian drug capital of Cali. The Drug Enforcement Administration has speculated that the bank is being used to launder money and that Soros' fellow shareholders may be members of a major drug cartel. And what is Trump wanting to do, folks? Trump is wanting to secure the borders to stop the drugs from coming over. Trump wants to do something with the heroin epidemic in America. You see, what I'm telling you is that a lot of the issues you think are really one-dimensional are multi-dimensional. These people are coming against Trump because he's not just about securing the borders, he's about keeping the American dollar. He's not just about securing the borders, he's about stopping drugs. You see, all of these things will benefit some of these globalist players that are setting themselves up to be financially enriched by the downfall of the American dollar. They will be enriched if these reports are true, and I have no reason to doubt that they are, that some of these people are counting on the legalization of drugs and are positioning themselves accordingly. You see, there's many reasons that some of these people would want to oppose Donald Trump. Well, here's another article, this one by my friend Cliff Kincaid, and he writes about the man that runs Open Society for George Soros. He says Soros hired Ari Nair as president of his Open Society Institute in 1993. Nair had worked for the ACLU, there you go, for 15 years, including 8 as national director. And where does the ACLU stand when it comes to drugs? Well, I just told you, didn't I? In his book, Taking Liberties, subtitled 4 Decades in the Struggle for Rights, Nair talks about his role in creating the Students for a Democratic Society, the SDS. Folks, that was a socialist organization. The same group that would eventually spawn the terrorist Weather Underground. Did you hear what I just said? Cliff Kincaid is writing that this man, Ari Nair, became the president of Soros's Open Society Institute in 1993, and that he used to play a role in the Students for a Democratic Society that eventually spawned the terrorist group, the Weather Underground. You remember Bill Ayers, Bernadine Dorn, the Weather Underground? Kind of violent people, wouldn't you say, the Weather Underground? Bombings, that's violence, right? It's terrorism, is it not? Well, would you be shocked then that some of the same people with the same worldviews connected back to these other groups would then be behind organizations that are funding some of the protesters, and that then some of these protests turn violent? Are you connecting the dots? Nair says that he hired Tom Hayden as one of the leaders, but became delusioned when Hayden in pro-communist direction he took the organization. Well, there you go. Whatever. I'm not sure I believe that, but nonetheless, this gives you an idea of who are some of the people around George Soros. Now, again, some of these people that are agitating for conflict. Have you heard some of them? I would like to know who's funding them. Watch what was said on the streets that CNN caught coming out of the mouth of one of the protesters.
Lily, your sign tonight says...
Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. If we don't fight, who's going to fight for us? People had to die for freedom where we're at today. We can't just do rallies. We have to fight back. There will be casualties on both sides. There will be, because people have to die to make a change in this world. But Trump, enough with your racism. Stop splitting families. Don't split my family.
So again, I asked the question, and it's simply a question. Who's funding these protesters? Where are they being agitated from or by? Who's agitating them? Agitate to the point of conflict. That's what Saul Alinsky said, the neo-Marxist Saul Alinsky. Well, if you would like to know who some of the groups George Soros funds, you might want to go to discoverthenetworks.org. Here is a printout of all the groups George Soros is funding, according to discoverthenetworks.org, and they have footnotes to document all of this. Let me just read to you one of the groups, or a couple of the groups he's funding. Here's one right away. It's called National Council of La Raza. National Council of La Raza. DiscoverTheNetworks.org says this group lobbies for racial preferences, bilingual education, stricter hate crime laws, mass immigration, and amnesty for illegal aliens. Well, that's National Council of La Raza. Well, would you like to know more about this group that supposedly is funded by George Soros, what their goals are? You think their goals are pro-America? Well, here's an article from Human Events. Human Events, an article back in April of 2006, And here's what it says, exclusive, the truth about La Raza. Here's what the article says in part. You know what La Raza means? It means the race, the race. What if Anglo-Saxons, white folks, Caucasians went around talking about the race? This is the race and we need to dominate with the race. That would be racist, wouldn't it? Well, why is this not racist if it's coming from another people group doing this? I think it is racism. Well, the article says La Raza means the race. La Raza movement, National Council de La Raza, the Council of the Race. But the National Council of La Raza succeeded in raking in over $15.2 million in federal grants last year. This was written in 2006, of which 7.9 was in the U.S. The Department of Education grants for charter schools and undisclosed amounts were get out the vote efforts supporting La Raza political positions. The Council of La Raza has succeeded in having itself added to the congressional hearings by Republican House and Senate leaders. And an anonymous senator even gave the Council of La Raza an extra $4 million in earmarked taxpayer money, supposedly for housing reform, while La Raza continues to lobby the Senate for virtual open borders and amnesty for illegal aliens. The article goes on to say, key among the secondary organizations is the radical racist group Movimiento I can't even say this. I got a D in high school Spanish. Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Atlans. Okay, well, the main thing you need to get is the Chicano de Atlan, or Chicano Student Movement of Atlan. It has an acronym, MICHA, M-E-C-H-A. Well, what is MICHA? MICHA is one of the most anti-American groups in the country, writes Human Events. One of the most anti-American groups in the country, which has permeated U.S. campuses since the 1960s and continues its push to carve a racist nation out of the American West. One of America's greatest strengths has been taking in immigrants from cultures around the world and assimilating them into our country as Americans. By being citizens of the U.S., we are Americans first and only in our national loyalties. This is totally opposed by MICHA, for the hordes of illegal immigrants pouring across our borders, to whom they say, quote, this is a quote from MICHA according to Human Events, quote, Chicano is our identity. It defines who we are as a people. It rejects the notion that we should assimilate into the Anglo-American melting pot. Aztlan was the legendary homeland of Aztecs. It became synonymous with the vast territories of the Southwest, brutally stolen from a Mexican people, marginalized and betrayed by the hostile custodians of the manifest destiny, end quote. Now that comes from statement on the University of Oregon MICHA website, January 3rd, 2006. So I guess they believe that there's this part of America that should go back to Mexico, and they don't want to assimilate. The article in Human Events goes on to say, MICHA isn't at all shy about their goals or their views of other races. Their founding principles are contained in these words, in El Plan Espiritual de Aztlan. Espiritual de Aztlan, I guess. What it really means is the spiritual plan for Aztlan. This is their spiritual plan for Aztlan. Again, forgive my Spanish. I got a D in high school Spanish. This is what they write in their plan. Quote, in the spirit of a new people that is conscious not only of its proud historical heritage, but also of the brutal gringo invasion of our territories. I guess that would be us. We're the gringos and we invaded their territories. We, the Chicano inhabitants and civilizers of the northern land of Aztlan, from whence came our forefathers, reclaiming the land of their birth and consecrating the determination of our people of the sun, declare that the call of our blood is our power, our responsibility, and our inevitable destiny. Aztlan belongs to those who plant the seeds, water the fields, and gather the crops, and not to the foreign Europeans. We are a bronze people with a bronze culture. Before the world, before all of North America, before all our borders in the bronze continent, we are a nation. We are a union of free pueblos. We are Aztlan. Wow, end quote. Well, the article goes on to say that they also call for rights, saying, quote, for the race, everything, outside the race, nothing. That's their slogan, according to Human Events. For the race, everything, outside the race, nothing. Now, again, is that not racist? I mean, I would say if a group of white folks were going around talking about the race and for the race everything and everyone outside the race nothing, I would say if a bunch of white people were doing that, I as a white person would say that's racist. That's racism. The Bible says we're of one blood, Acts 17. We're of one blood. But where's the media pointing out, other than conservative media, that La Raza, the race, is working with groups like Micha on college campuses? Now, are you understanding why it is that maybe some of these college students are rioting and saying the things they're saying? Could it be they're being influenced by the radicals on their college campuses that are being funded by people like George Soros? The article in Human Events goes on to say, but this is coming straight from the official Micha sites at Georgetown, University of Texas, UCLA, University of Michigan, University of Colorado, University of Oregon, and many other colleges and universities around the country. Micha was, in fact, reported to be one of the main organizers of those street demonstrations. There you go. We witnessed over the past weeks, and this was written in 2006. That helps explain why those hordes of illegal immigrants weren't asking for amnesty. They were demanding an end to U.S. law, period. Unlike past waves of immigrants who sought to become responsible members of American society, these protesters reject American society altogether because they have been taught that America rightfully belongs to them. Micha and La Raza movement teach that Colorado, California, Arizona, Texas, Utah, New Mexico, Oregon, and parts of Washington state make up an area known as Aztlan, a fictional ancestral homeland of the Aztecs before Europeans arrived in North America. As such, it belongs to the followers of Micha. These are all areas America should surrender to La Raza once enough immigration, legal or illegal, enter. You hear that? Once enough legal or illegal enter to claim a majority, as in Los Angeles, the current borders of the United States will simply be extinguished. The plan is referred to as Reconquista or Reconquest of the Western U.S. Quote, Human Events writes, but it won't end with territorial occupation and secession. The final plan for La Raza movement includes the ethnic cleansing of Americans of European, African, and Asian descent out of Aztlan. You hear that? Ethnic cleansing. Do you see, my friends? Even African Americans. Well, what are they setting up here for? Civil unrest. You're going to have people waging against each other. And who's funding these groups? People like George Soros, Open Society, right? That's what all the documents are telling me. And how would that benefit them? Agitate to the point of conflict. Change comes from the conflict. You see what's going on here, folks? What's going on is the attempt to destroy America. To say America is an evil place. America got what it got by stealing it. Socialism, we need to redistribute the wealth. Capitalists, they're evil. They steal. They're wicked people. The traditional Americans and their values, they're evil. And now you got the Mexicans being pitted against the African Americans. Because according to this report, they're going to kick out all Americans, European, African, and Asian descent. Do we have problems with the Mexicans and the African Americans, the Mexicans and the Asians, the blacks and the Asians? We've got people agitating, race baiting to create instability, and then they take advantage of the instability for their agenda. Folks, this is what I've been warning about in grave influence, religious Trojan horse, the coming religious Reich. And sadly, we have so-called Republicans and religious right members, evangelical members, taking part in organizations funded by George Soros. Are you getting an understanding of the worldview of George Soros? Well, folks, we're going to have to continue part 2 because we're just scratching the surface. We'll pick it up next week. Now, if you appreciate this broadcast, my friends, there's 2 ways you can support us. It takes hours to read all this and produce it, put it together, and distribute it free of charge in the bandwidth and the apps and the Roku channel. And you can join the Situation Room at situationroom.net, which is a big part of our general operating budget, have access to all of our television and radio shows, transcripts, ebooks, audiobooks, and more. SituationRoom.net. You can join for as little as $8.99 a month. Would you do that right now? SituationRoom.net/join. You'll find all the details. SituationRoom.net/join. And then would you make a tax-deductible contribution to our Worldview Weekend Foundation and help support our broadcast ministry as we give these programs out for many people to watch for several days, free of charge to anyone as a ministry of Worldview Weekend and Worldview Weekend Foundation. You can make a tax-deductible contribution right now at worldviewweekendfoundation.com, worldviewweekendfoundation.com. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Now, next week, we'll pick up part 2, examining the worldview of George Soros. And we'll be able to examine his worldview by looking at some of the groups that he funds and what their goals and agenda are. Because, you see, Donald Trump, what he's facing is really people who are battling him on a worldview front. Now, long after Donald Trump is out of office, and you're watching this program maybe years from now, it's still going to be relevant because these worldviews will still be battling each other. Do you understand who they are, what their goal is, and how we should respond? We'll pick that up next week. I'm Brannon Howse. Thanks for watching. Take care.